Welcome to Shelby Stitcher. This is Joan Parker. I am now sewing the last row of my half square triangle scrappy strippy quilt, and this is the very end of the top. So I wanted to show how I sew this seam now that it's been pinned. First of all, I never run over a pin. So I pull the pin out right before I get to it, and while I'm there I pick this up and look underneath to make sure all the seams are heading the right direction. This whole edge is biased, and that shouldn't be something that scares you. Just be careful not to pull back on it or to stretch it out while you're ironing it. Now this seam I'm coming up to is very thick, so I'm going to use my seam ripper here to keep this aligned. Hold that down till right before it goes under the needle, and I'll take out my pin. I love having a magnetic pin cushion. Wouldn't sew without one if I could help it. And again, I use the seam ripper tip to just keep these edges down, and in these areas where you've got the background on the front and back, it's a very thin seam, so that's not any problem. Again, I lift this up and I just gently pull that back. Not pull it, but just make sure it's facing away from the needle, as it should be for this particular intersection. And you can see where my seam is going under the foot before the seam intersection. So I'm going to take my pin out, and here's a flippy up corner. Just going to hold that down with my seam ripper as it goes under, being careful to pull that out before it gets to the needle, or just to have it on the very edge. And again, on this type of quilt, I pick this up very frequently to make sure that I'm not pushing a seam allowance the wrong direction by putting it through my needle, or not through my needle, but under my needle. And again, I can feel a little seam there, but that seam's going the right direction. So I'm going to make sure that these two edges are lined up properly. I need to pull that one over a tiny bit. And hold that down flat just so it doesn't interfere with my view. Pressing that forward. Now the seam on the bottom is going towards the needle. Can you see that? So I'm going to make sure that's pressed under there very well. And pull out my pin. And again, this is one of those seams where there are probably 8 layers of fabric, so you can hear the thump thump as it goes over. But I just sew that very slowly, and I'm pushing my quilt away from the needle and under as I go along. And I'm going to hold my finger. I'm trying to explain what I do because I know I do it without thinking, and if you haven't had this kind of instruction before, you might not think about it. But on this seam that we're approaching, see, this top seam is going to face towards the needle, and the underneath one is facing towards me. I'm going to go as close as I can before I hit the needle, and I'm watching to make sure that that seam doesn't get pushed this way as it goes over, and it's fine. Take out my needle, and I'm going to hold on to the back of the seam just to give it the tiniest of tugs to get it over that hump. And on this, the seams are facing me on the bottom, so that's not so much of a concern. If I hold this one down just so it gets under the needle, again, to keep it from obstructing my view. And on this one, I can feel that bottom, where this green pin head is, this seam is going towards the needle. And this is another real super thick one, because you can see on the top, there are 2 layers on this side, 2 layers on this side, and then another 4 layers here. So this is going to be a really bumpy seam, so I'm going to take it slowly. There's no rush, and this makes so much difference in how your quilt tops look after they're pressed. I quilt for customers, and I can not even recount all the times where there have been lumps and bumps in the seams, and it's because they've just sewn over it all willy-nilly, if you were trying to think of a good word to describe that. Again, now I can tell I'm on 2 background squares where there's no extra layers of bulk, because it's just sewing quietly and there's no noise when the needle goes through the fabric. But here I am coming up to another big intersection. And don't be afraid to stop and pick up your presser foot to make sure everything's going the right direction. And these are facing towards the needle, so I'm just going to hold that down as it goes under the foot. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Alexa, stop timer. Sorry about that. We had a date with Alexa here. So I go to the end, and again I wait to work my materials right under my presser foot, and I like to go back a few stitches before I get to the end of the seam, because if I wait, sometimes it catches that end and won't go backwards very well, and it kind of tears the seam up. But there we have it. I'm going to grab a little leader ender, send that under, and that is the last seam on my half square triangle strippy scrappy quilt. Now I noticed that when I was picking